Hello, and welcome to WhyMake, the podcast where we talk with artists about why they make, with me, your host, Eric Wolken. To see images of the artwork in this episode and all of our episodes, go to why-make.com. I was 6 in 1967 when the Pittsburgh Embroiderers Guild put on its first exhibition at the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. The center was in the middle of a beautiful neighborhood park, not too far from the house I grew up in, and my sister and I would go there often and sit on the concrete lions and run around the fountain at the entrance to the park. My mom, Tobey Wolken, was a self-taught artist who would later go on to join the guild, now known as the Pittsburgh Fiber Arts Guild. Fabric was her canvas, the sewing machine her main tool for drawing botanically inspired works of art. She was a mainstay at the Guild's biennial Fiberarts International, helping to sort the mountain of entries for the jury, and as long as she was physically able, acting as a docent for the exhibition. Fiberarts International grew into an exhibition that brought the world to Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh to the world. A New York Times article in 2023 proudly declared, "Fiber arts is finally being taken seriously." But in our home, beginning 40 years ago, this was never in doubt. This rich tradition that was mainly practiced by women had been relevant for hundreds of years before the New York Times deemed it so. Still, there have been a lot of recent changes in the world of fiber arts. There's a great expansion of the raw materials used in the art, which now includes everything from wig hair to recycled paint cloths, two of the materials that show up in the 2025 Fiber Art Show. There's also been a lot more men who practice the art, and it's likely not a coincidence that the field that was once deemed women's craft, sewing and quilting, is now widely accepted as fine art. In this episode of WhyMake, we are going to take a look behind the scenes at something that feels very close to home, the 2025 Fiber Arts International. Later in this episode, we will talk with two of the artists featured in this year's show, Akudzwe Elsie Chiwa and Chieko Murasugi. But we start with two women who have been working behind the scenes on the exhibition for the past 30-plus years.
My name is Risë Nagan. I'm a practicing artist based here in Pittsburgh. I'm a member of the Fiber Arts Guild, long-standing. Fiberart International evolved out of the genesis of the guild itself, which started, I think, in 1960. And the two pressing factors were feminism and the limitations women were experiencing in their lives at the time. And the second, which is also extremely important, is the desire to move the whole perception of craft into being part of the fine arts in the United States. So initially our organization was devoted to work by threaded needle. It had to be stitchery of some sort, either machine or hand done. No knitting, no weaving. It was simply that. So our first shows were in the early 60s at the Center for the Arts, and they were membership shows. But we decided that we needed an international show that was open to people outside the guild.
I'm kind of curious. It seemed to be a major step to go from Pittsburgh to international.
I think if you think about what artists need to do when we want to grow, and one way to do it, to start to invite people from outside to come in and interact with you.
How have you seen this exhibition change over time in terms of techniques and materials and content?
It's not linear. These shows have always wanted to track trends in the field. Some years are very heavy with weaving, the content is more personal. My sense of it is that the jury is really critical to all this. We have always made instruction to the jury to choose things that are forward-thinking and that push the medium, that we are inviting crossover work, etc. And each jury will have a slightly different take on what that is. For the most part, It's really about putting together a group of works that they feel reflect a range of what's going on now.
So you guys, as the sponsoring organization, have never shied away from controversy. You've let the jurors decide, and you have not intervened.
Never. Not in my experience. I'm Patty Kennedy-Zafred, and like Risë, I'm also a practicing studio artist. I have been a member of the Fiber Arts Guild of Pittsburgh since, I believe, 1987, and co-directed 3 Fiberart Internationals, one with Risë. You know, my experience also with the curators that we've worked with have been delighted in some cases that things would be so innovative and so pushing the limits because it makes for a more interesting exhibition. The average person going into a Fiberart International, the goal is to have them stand there and go, wow. I do believe that it is no longer a craft exhibition, it's an art exhibition. I believe it's perceived as an art exhibition by those who enter and by those who jury.
Sometime in the early 90s, I went to my first Fiberarts International exhibit with my mom, who was also acting as a docent for the show. I had never really been to a fiber art show before, so I had really no expectations of what I would see, but I have a clear memory of being blown away by the work. There were 2 pieces that have really stayed with me. One was a piece made from staples, as in the staples from a classic swingline office stapler, to which I asked my mom, "How is that fiber?" Her response was that the staples were woven into a fabric and referenced a fiber material, and the technique was weaving. And I have been intrigued by the world of fiber arts ever since, and when invited, I jumped at the chance to meet 2 of the artists featured in this year's show.
Hi, my name is Akudzwe Elsie Chiwa. I am a visual artist, a storyteller, and a cultural worker that is currently living and working in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was born in Zimbabwe, in a small town in Zimbabwe called Mashingo, and I moved to the US in 2021. My work deals with notions of identity, mysticism, storytelling, and the lost and forgotten histories of the collective Shona cultural peoples of Southern Africa, Zimbabwe.
Akudzwe's piece in the exhibit was called Miranda Washi. This is her first time being featured in the show, and her piece was the 3rd place award winner. If you had to give me a working definition of fiber art, how would you describe it?
I consider myself a sculptor, not a fiber artist. I consider things that are called crafts or fibers as sculptures. I think it is an issue of wording, and in a world which prioritizes masculinity, so certain things are considered sculpture and other things are considered fiber art or craft and all of these things. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with fiber art being called fiber art. It's just I, as an artist, always aim to deconstruct what a thing is. So me being a woman who considers herself a sculptor, but primarily works in fiber, is trying to pose a question, trying to make the person think about what is valued in the arts and in society and what is kind of looked down as, you know, something that is lesser. I don't know if I'm making sense.
You're making perfect sense, because I think what you're saying is that I've read this many places. One of the reasons why fiber art has been considered a secondary craft and or art because it was associated with women.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong in regards to women making art and claiming it as fiber art, or whoever wants to claim it as that. I just think it's, to me, I all hold it at the same regard as a bronze sculpture or something that is considered a masculine way of making things.
My name is Chieko Murasugi. I've been a visual artist for over 30 years, mostly a painter, but recently I've made a foray into fiber arts, and I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Chieko was born in Tokyo, Japan, and then immigrated to Canada as a young child. This is her first time being featured in the Fiberarts International with her piece, From Rags to Wishes. And again, I asked her how she would define fiber art.
I figure it has to do with thread and, whether, you use the thread to weave something, so make your own cloth. I think as long as it uses thread, and of course you could use, thread can be made from wire, it can be plastic, it can be, organic materials like cotton or wool. That's my definition of fiber, is that it uses thread. Fiber arts was not considered art when I was in art school for the first time. So that was in the early 1980s when I started a BFA in painting at York University in Toronto, Canada. I think that the G's Bend quilts, that was a breakthrough moment for fiber art. Those were quilts made in kind of, outside of the New York or LA art scene. But they were so clearly art.
Let's now take a deeper look into these two artists and what inspires their work and the actual pieces they created for this exhibition. We start with Akudzwe and how her roots in Southern Africa influence her work.
I've seen pain. I've also seen love. I've seen two extremes of humanity, and I've also seen the middle. And I make work because I think as people, we don't know how to empathize. Every person that you meet has context behind them. And if we took our time to understand the context of who our neighbors are, then we wouldn't have all the problems that we have. And a lot of my work is trying to engage the empathy from a cultural perspective, from a Southern African way of life. This idea of humanism, or Ubuntu, in Shona we call it Chiwanu, right? It is tradition, but it is also connecting yourself to your community, like spiritually, like intrinsically. So to the point that harming another is harming yourself. That's where it's supposed to go. It doesn't always go there. And I feel as a society, as humans, we've lost empathy. And a lot of my work is about dealing with the unresolved trauma through storytelling. I use fabric, I use fiber because it has threads and it weaves in and out like time, like experience, like history. And I use it as a visual language, in the way that my ancestors, like tens of thousands of years ago, would draw on the walls and the rocks to tell their stories, how they would adorn their bodies like centuries ago to tell their stories. My work is about the human body without the human body. That's why I use fiber, I use hair, I use beads, I use shells, I use things that have touched the body, things that witness history, that witness the body, that experience with the body, that when, in places of war and famine, you see clothes where bones are, right? It's memories. A person lived, existed. And I make because I'm a storyteller. I come from a generation of storytellers. I come from a generation of sangomas and healers. But because of Christianity, that was demonized. So the line was cut. And a lot of my work is reclaiming that identity in a different way, healing. If I can make art that heals in any way and every way you can think of, then I have succeeded.
I always was good at drawing and painting. Somehow there was this unspoken message that it should always be a hobby and I should have a real profession. So anyhow, I ended up getting a doctorate in psychology. and did a postdoctoral fellowship. And at the end of that, I decided that it was boring to me. And I went back to art and I became a painter. I tried different kinds of art, illustration, figurative art, but I kind of landed on abstraction. And so I was an abstract painter for many years. And it was only by like a chance encounter that I came back into fiber. As a teenager, I sewed a lot. I sewed many of my clothes. So I always had the sewing skills, but I stopped sewing then, right? I got tired of making my clothes and decided to buy them. So I didn't sew for a very long time, but just a few years ago, I met a woman who saw my paintings and said, "I love your art. I want to sew them. I want to make sewing versions of your art." Now, she was a very, very good sewer, and she translated my paintings into 2 silk wall hangings. And they were quite beautiful. I thought, there has to be more to this than just taking my paintings and making them into wall hangings. And I was cleaning my brushes with rags, which I do, but the rags were cut up white sheets. And, I was using fairly what you call pretty colors. And I would look at these little rags my brush rags, and they were so beautiful. Each one looked like an Impressionist painting. They had all these random dabs and splotches, and it was acrylic paint that I was using. And I thought, wow, there must be something I could do with these rags. And then somehow I sort of hit upon the idea of making a kimono with these rags. So I said, okay, I'm going to make a kimono with this, but how is it going to look? I think I already had a pile of these rags when I decided to use them, right? So I was not manufacturing, parts of my kimono, while I was cleaning my brushes. So they were in that sense random. However, it's interesting that in my painting practice, I love the idea of random. I had these rags, and I was also obsessed with the hexagon, because the hexagon has 2 meanings for me. One is that in the Asian culture, it's the symbol of longevity, because the tortoise, which lives a long time, has hexagonal shells. And the other is that, my parents were in Tokyo during the Second World War, and they were experiencing the Allied bombings. And the most devastating bombs were the napalm bombs that were dropped on March 9th, 1945. And the napalm bombs were housed in these hexagonal cylinders, right? And so I thought, oh my gosh, not only is it a symbol of longevity, but it's also, a killer object. I mean, it's a lethal object. And so with that in mind, I decided to cut up these paint rags into hexagon shapes and then sew these hexagon shapes together into a kimono. And since then, I've made 4 using completely different techniques.
It is a pair of child legs sitting on a chair, on a rug. And this was the first time that I introduced something that was a form, a pair of legs. So it's synthetic hair fiber and woven into like a fabric and then molded onto like a soft body. The body is distending to the back, melting into the foreground. The piece is called Muranda Washe. The word Muranda has 2 meanings, servant or slave of God, and it speaks to othering. So immigration, queer communities, and the question I pose with that piece is that if Jesus was to come now, who do you think Jesus would hang out with? With you who have destroyed the world in his name, or with the ones that you subjugate and call, vile? That's the question I'm posing. What does it mean? And so the pattern on the little legs are the pattern that you see on a lot of bags that a lot of immigrants use when they're moving, crossing, or moving their lives. In Zimbabwe, we call them Changan bags. In South Africa, they call them Ama Zimbabwe bags. I think in Ghana, they call them Ghana Must Go bags. And in every single instance, it references the immigration of one people from one country to another or from one space to another and the strife of that journey.
Are these woven bags?
Yes. So they're just like from China, and they're also known as Machina bags or bags from China. It is humongous, like a bale-sized. Yeah. And it's just like, you can easily put it away. You can stack 6 of them very easily because they're flat, but you can fit so much in them. And they're strong and they're durable. They're journey bags. And they represent migration, especially from the global south, or people who are escaping something, right? You're not going to see someone moving from Switzerland to the US with that bag. It represents a certain demographic of people. And I made this work over a couple of years. In 2022 and 2023, I myself was an immigrant. I just recently became a citizen. And just how I felt, coming into the US at a time when immigrants who look like me are not wanted. My mom left me at 9 to emigrate to another country for a better life so that I could go to school and be where I am right now, the circle. So I think that feeling turns into an emotion, a trigger, a trauma, right? I make the legs of a child because I know I wasn't the only one. I know what those children feel like. I know what it feels to be them. I was them. So I start making the legs. I buy the little shoes. I buy the little socks. I put the little shoes and the little socks on the legs. I'm like, I can't just leave a pair of legs. This is a person that's melting away, becoming a part of a culture they were never a part of, right? Moving in, disconnecting so you can connect. So I start weaving. I'm weaving. I'm thinking about how hard it is for people who are in the global south that have to escape places where they can't be freely like queer or part of the LGBTQ or identify as themselves.
Art is often a way of capturing emotion in motion, a record of personal history, cultural memory, and transformation. And just like the stories behind their works, the artists themselves don't sit still for long. Their materials shift, their ideas change, their questions evolve. So I asked Akudzwe and Chieko, what are you working on now?
I've been working on this, I don't know if I'll ever finish it, on this magical realism book that has all of these cultural elements and things that knowledge I have gathered over the years about African spirituality and things and humanity. And that is the pool I draw my ideas from. So if I have something I'm thinking about, I either put it in there for later or I go back in there for later. So a lot of my materiality or the reasons I work, that it comes from that pool that I draw. So it's like a journal, but it's like fantasy. It's like I'm telling my life story in a very magical way.
I have 2 things going on. Okay, one is a painting, and it's, a continuation of the randomization series. And then I'm laughing because the piece that I'm working on now, the fiber piece, is deconstructed bras, like women's bras. It's a kimono made out of bras.
What will fiber arts look like in 25 years?
I think it will transform just like it has transformed in the last 25 years from what it was 25 years ago. I think the most beautiful thing about fiber art and any kind of art form is how it transforms with the moment and the cultural moments as well. What's happening? What materials are people interested in? What is happening environmentally? What is happening globally that can shape fiber arts in a way that I can't even comprehend or begin to imagine it would look like in 25 years. Because as a society as well, we are at this space where we're shifting where we can't really tell what the next trend is.
Listening to what's next for Chieko and Akudzwe reminds us that fiber art doesn't just reflect the past or present, it threads its way into the future. It's a living language of creativity and resistance. Fiber art is here to stay, even though for hundreds of years it was denigrated as women's work. This exhibition is proof of that. Through its 50-odd years of existence, the Fiberarts International is not going away anytime soon. Fiberart International is on view until August 30th, 2025 at Contemporary Craft in the Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh and Brew Arts in Pittsburgh's historic South Side. You can go to the exhibition's webpage at contemporarycraft.org, all one word, and brewhousearts.org, also one word. To see the work I referenced in this episode, go to the podcast page of WhyMake.com, where you can also see a botanically inspired fiber arts piece by my mom, Tobey Wolken. As always, thanks for listening, and WhyMake. WhyMake is a production of Eric Wolken. This episode was edited with help from Johanna Zorn and mixed by Joe DeSo. Thanks again to my guests, Akudzwe Elsie Chiwa, Chieko Murasugi, Patty Kennedy-Zafred, and Risë Nagan. You can help support the WhyMake podcast by going to why-make.com and clicking on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible through our fiscal sponsor, Fractured Atlas.